Okay, so many of you have already met Dr. Wendy Atkins-Sayre, who's here joining us today. She is from the Department of Communication at the University of Southern Mississippi. I'll just tell you a few things about Wendy you may already know. So she received her PhD at the University of Georgia and started carving out one of her several areas of expertise in speaking center design and execution, which is actually the first point of contact I had with her, but didn't know that we would have future points of contact. So when I was at my other institution before I came here, I had to start a speaking center, and I still don't know what that is, but for sure didn't know what it was. And like, she had this reputation of having the best one in the nation, but kind of the only studied one in the nation. And so I contacted her, and she just gave me everything that she had. She just gave it to me. So
I didn't charge you any.
Right. So when I saw her name come across for this position, I was like, oh my gosh, I think that's the woman that gave me everything. That's like a great reputation you give her. Okay. So she started out at Agnes Scott in their speaking center as the director, and then stepped into the role of the department chair at the University of Southern Mississippi after being their speaking center director for a long time. So she's been the department chair, and she now serves as the interim associate director of the School of Communication. So her cultivated areas of research are in rhetoric, focusing on the role that it plays in forming identity. And she's published in the areas of Southern identity, social movements and animal rights, visual rhetoric, and women in the media. She's co-authored and edited 3 books published by the University Press of Mississippi, Peter Lang, and Lexington, with the 4th book under contract with Peter Lang. She's generated multiple peer-reviewed articles and book chapters, all of which happened during the time that she was in substantial administrative positions as the director of the Speaking Center and the chair of the department, and now the interim associate director. So she's recognized in our discipline through top paper awards, mentoring awards, service awards, leadership awards, and we are just fortunate to have her and welcome her today. Following her talk, we will welcome questions, and then we will sweep her off to a welcome reception with graduate students following in the theater building. So we're excited to have you here with us on campus, and we welcome you to talk to us today about serving as the chair of our program.
Thank you. You highlighted so many fantastic things, so I sound great there. I mean, I'm going to give a little more context and background on this, obviously over the next few minutes, because I was asked to focus on those 3 areas. One of the best things about interviewing is that you get to meet a lot of people. One of the hardest things is that you have to talk about yourself over and over and over again. So this is the most awkward title slide I've ever created, I think. But, you know, I always like to acknowledge this is not just about me. What I've accomplished over the years has very much been a part of a community, whether it was as an undergrad. I started off at Texas State and did my master's there as well, and had some fantastic mentors who are still my mentors today. I still turn to them for advice. Along the way, teaching at various institutions, I learned so much from colleagues, I learned from students. I learned a lot from students going from very different institutions, and learned about my own teaching style as I still learn. And then at Georgia, of course, where I did my PhD, and again, made some great friends, great colleagues, now research partners, and mentors who, again, are still mentoring me today. So all those other people are up there too. It's filtering through me right now. So, but I've learned a lot of great things about the department and the college and the university over the last few hours. So I know I've mentioned some of these things to various people in meetings today. I apologize if there's any overlap, but I promise you'll learn something different about me. And I did get to talk about all of these with each group. So I wanted to focus first on leadership, because I know that's what you're really thinking about is, you know, who is this person who thinks they can walk in and chair the department. I mean, I did pause when I saw the ad. I did not immediately think, oh, they need to hire me. Well, clearly, you know, this is the right person. There's always that question, you know, can I take on a department with such a great tradition, with great people at an institution that's serving such an important role in the area. But I have learned quite a bit through my time at Southern Miss, and it's not just that. So let me just take you through my administrative life, and start by saying I didn't seek this out. I did not necessarily think I think I'll be an administrator. I was always drawn to it in some ways, but it was only because I wanted to help people, and so I would step in. I became I don't even know if I was officially the assistant to the basic course director at Texas State. It was really just me saying, do you need any help? You want some help writing that exam? Should we put together a TA handbook? And so, I mean, I officially stepped into that role, and I liked it because I got to help some people who were starting the program and had no idea, you know, what to do walking into the classroom. But as Joy said, I officially started in a leadership position at the Speaking Center at Atkins-Sayre, a small liberal arts college in Atlanta. Just as I was finishing up my degree, I saw they had a position open for a speaking center. What's a speaking center? Like, I don't know, but I'm going to find out really quickly because I like the institution. You know, I like having a job after I graduate, so now I start to look for information. And frankly, I mean, I found there's not a lot of information out there, but there's a great community supporting it. And so I looked out and connected with some folks at the Communication Center community and took so much information in and decided that as one way that I could give back, I would eventually research in that area, try to publish in that area. I didn't necessarily see a leadership role there at first, but I definitely wanted to contribute. And that led to my position at Southern Miss. So in total, I worked in speaking centers for about 12 years. I should mention those are peer tutoring centers. I know you have something similar here. In that case, the speaking centers were both affiliated with the Writing Center, but they were standalone and focused on public speaking, but really all oral communication. So they would also help with interviewing, class discussion, anything like that. And so I learned a lot about leadership in that case, as some of you heard me say, because I was working with students, but these were, you know, cream of the crop students, and I knew they had a lot to offer, and especially in the case of Atkins-Sayre, they knew the institution, I didn't. And so I made the decision early on. I mean, I can't imagine this would fit with my personality anyway, but I wasn't going to walk in and say, I'm the director, this is what we'll do, we're changing everything. Instead, I listened, I learned from them, I tried to read as much as I possibly could, mainly Writing Center literature. And together, we created this great center at Atkins-Sayre, and I could take that to Southern Miss. So at Southern Miss, I was able to work with a larger group, but it was still students, undergraduates, not all comm studies majors. Some of them were, you know, came from across campus. All the graduate students were in that area. I also informally worked with faculty because as part of that role, I was tasked with working with the Writing Center director to educate faculty on how to bring speaking assignments into the classroom, writing assignments in the classroom, how to assess them, how to give feedback and such. So I was in a leadership role there, but again, I listened. I never barged in and told them what it would be. And together, again, we created, and thank you for, I don't know that that's the best center in the nation, but it certainly means a lot to us. And we've seen some great deal of success with students. And it's really important to me that the student workers in there have also seen success. So many of them have gone on to research in that area, publish in that area, and now lead their own speaking centers across the nation. So that's, I'm really proud of that. So yes, then the department chair position came open. This was Chuck Tardy, who had been our chair for 16 years, decided this is enough. I'm ready to step down. And we all went, oh my gosh, what will we do now? And I never really pictured myself in that situation until he talked to me and asked why not. You know, what are the differences between, well, you know, personnel issues with faculty, very different. Mentoring in that way, very different. Budgetary, actually, the funny thing is the Speaking Center budget was larger than the departmental budget, sadly, with we took the salary out. So, you know, I thought about it and decided that this would work well. So I was, again, fortunate to have a year to shadow him and learn all I could before he stepped down. And then immediately we were met with a crisis. So crisis number one was budget cuts. So all the things that we were used to, unlimited travel, you know, I mean, support for research assistants, teaching assistantships during the summer, just went away instantly. It was a hard place to walk into as a new chair. But we survived that time, and I could talk more specifically about what we did there. And I keep saying we because I really do mean it wasn't just the chair, it was faculty, and I would help facilitate that process. The second big crisis was a provost who decided to reorganize the entire university. And so their departments would be going away, we would become schools, and we're now there. So we're now the School of Communication. And so that is why I've now stepped into the interim associate director of the School of Communication, which is a lot like being chair. Just a lot more faculty, a lot more students. We went from 9 faculty to about 25, staff of about 5 or 6. We went from 100 undergrads to 650, and about 25 grad students to 60 or 70. So it's been an adjustment, an adventure. And again, I could talk more about that, but there are 2 committees, I think, in particular, experience that I think has informed how I see myself as a leader. And that's the work that I've done as chair and director, and specifically working on policy documents, because there's a lot of controversy with that, and in curricular reform. And that, I think, is more applicable to the situation, just because I know those are some of the things that you're thinking about. So we have now undertaken the curriculum reform in journalism, which is, you know, not my area. So I'm now leading folks who wanted to revise their own curriculum, but just could not push it through for a variety of reasons. That's kind of a tricky situation, and so very carefully I have led those discussions. With faculty doing a large amount of work on, you know, some of it had been done before I arrived, and now it's already made it through the college curriculum committee, and so we're on to the university level. That's something for them to celebrate because they were able to get that through. The second thing is policy, because now we're talking about tenure and promotion for very different departments all coming together. And so there have been some heated discussions about some of those, either curricular reform or policy changes. But I have to keep coming back to what I've learned from leadership, whether it was again, with working with students, with faculty, or in the discipline in various ways. And so what really motivates me, helping others, which I think keeps you grounded, and the idea that, you know, you're not going to help someone if you walk in and dictate something. That's not going to be very helpful. Organizational skills have come in handy, and that's part of the reason I found myself, you know, in the situation of leadership. And also the big picture, constantly coming back to the so what. All right, here's a policy. Why? Where does it fit into the big picture? And that's, I think, helps in the conversations. So it should, I hope, come as no surprise that I always want to look for a clear vision. And that's not, you know, my vision, it's our vision, and that's easier said than done. But, you know, a lot of times that's already there. You've already done the hard work, but it's keeping a focus on that what is driving us, what are our goals, those kinds of things. So my priority in the beginning is always to develop and follow a clear vision together. Reaching consensus, again, easier said than done, but and it does take a lot of time. But in most cases, people are more likely to be dedicated and motivated if they got to that same point together. And so we're seeing some of that right now, even though we've accomplished some things with the new school. We've really tried to reach that consensus. There have been some stopping points where consensus could not be reached, and I can talk about that, but I think we always have to work towards that. Team environment sounds kind of cheesy, I mean, but we teach that, of course, but how do you create this team environment? But because we will always have disagreements, we'll always have different visions, I think it's really important to remember the human element, that at the end of the meeting, whether we vehemently disagreed or not, we're walking out as colleagues, as friends, we're on the same team, we're working towards the same end goal. So it's how you run a meeting, it's how you treat each other when someone needs help, whether they're sick and need you to cover their class or whatever, need help with a copy machine. But it's also making effort to get to know each other more, and so it's always, it takes time to create that, but I think that's really important. And then, of course, collaboration, which is connected with that mindset. That means that you have a stronger department or school or whatever the entity is if you're working together again. And it's everything from collaborating on research projects or teaching, working with graduate students, or again, going back to helping each other out with, I'm sick and I have to come to that class. So these are the things that guide me. It's very much shifted over time. And I think I've gathered more examples, but I've always gone back to this. And I think generally, if you work together as a team, you treat each other with respect, we're going to get to the right place. We're going to achieve what we want to achieve. So I know that's part of what you wanted to think about was, well, what would this person be as a leader? But of course, you're also thinking of me as a researcher, I hope. And so this is going to be a fast introduction, but I wanted to give you an idea of the variety of projects that I've taken on and why there's been such a variety. So my primary area has been rhetoric. And it looks at first glance, if you look at all the different topics, you might think, what connects this together? It is all about identity, and so I'll keep coming back to that topic. So that's where I'm going to spend the majority of my time today, talking about the rhetoric research. But I did want to mention the work that I've had in communication education. I became interested in that by working on the Journal of Communication Education with Don Rubin. I was his editorial assistant, fortunate enough to have that experience while it was at Georgia. And that's where I became familiar with a lot of literature in that area. I knew that I probably wouldn't research in that area myself, just because I wasn't a quantitative researcher. But I certainly wanted to encourage that research and learn it, as a person who's in the classroom. Come back around to the Communication Center world. I wanted to give back, as I mentioned, and so the first edited volume that I did with Esther Yook was really just all of these papers that had been out there that people had been circulating that finally came together. So it's a little scattered. If I could go back and change that, I probably would, but it was welcome. It's still cited today, and I'm excited that people still pick it up when they're creating their first speaking center or comm center. The second one was more intentional because Esther and I wanted to take what we know in communication studies and apply it to the peer tutoring world, because we knew it wasn't just speaking centers that would use this, it was any kind of peer tutoring center. And we also knew that our colleagues who were researching in the area of personal and communication education generally, group, any kind of related research could tell that community something and could see comm centers as a research outlet. So the second book was much more intentional, and it's all about training peer tutors and teaching them how to be better communicators. So yeah, that continues to be an interest of mine, although I haven't been able to pursue it as much. So what I have mainly been focusing on is these different areas. So for example, women in politics, I've continued to be interested in that. I mean, an early interest in the suffrage movement, and that's going to be a theme throughout my research as well as protest, conflict. In particular, I looked at Elizabeth Cady Stanton's use of racist arguments in the suffrage movement and how that created so much tension. I was always the one to go to. This is, of course, the topic that was the hardest to investigate because a lot of those texts hadn't been saved. I think it's easier access now. But that first drew me in, and that's where I started with women in politics. Another example is a project that looked at Jane Swift, who was the governor of Massachusetts, who was the first woman to give birth while in office. And you might remember, here she's seen with her twins and an older daughter, was torn apart by the media. And actually, I shouldn't just say the media, we should know better than just to throw that term out there, but by people from the right and the left, by women and men, by politicians and people who were just kind of shock jocks, that kind of take on it. It was coming from every direction, and I thought it was so interesting that everyone had an opinion about women in politics. Where they was at their place, basically. And some of the things they said about her, absolutely. I mean, her identity, her body, her being, actually would have prevented her from being in that office. So I would like to go back to some more political issues, but especially with identity. I've spent a lot more time on animals and humans and the line that we naturally think we see between them, the division. Initially, that was in things like PETA, actually, these are all PETA ads, and that's primarily where I focused, people for the ethical treatment of animals. In one paper that I've written, I looked specifically at visuals and how they use the visual element to blur that line and hopefully motivate a change in behavior based on that blurring. So if I don't see myself as different from animals, maybe I shouldn't eat them, maybe I shouldn't use them for entertainment, that kind of argument. In a more recent publication that just came out with a grad student, we look at the explicit comparisons that they make. And a lot of you have probably heard their Holocaust campaign, which was much more controversial, but I think this one, which was a series of comparisons like this, I know you can't see the wording necessarily, but the imagery there was pretty disturbing as well. In both cases, especially ended up pulling down the Holocaust campaign altogether. Not because they were worried about, upsetting people, let's just be honest, but because that was a response that got even more, discussion in the media because they responded in that way. And then another recent publication looks specifically, again, and here I co-authored with my typical co-author, Ashley Stokes at UNC Charlotte. She comes from PR rhetoric perspective, and so we wanted to look specifically at the back and forth between SeaWorld and PETA, and how PETA was able to manipulate that corporation into changing its practices. So this was particularly a lot of fun. There was a lot of fun videos that PETA put out in response to that. So I imagine I'll continue publishing in that area, but I think it definitely stretches the boundaries with identity. I've been talking a lot about this too, and the idea of Southern identity. And some of you heard me say this earlier, but I have a personal connection to this one as well, because I'm Texan. So I grew up in South Texas and the Corpus Christi area. And I always thought I was a Southerner. I mean, as far as I knew, like everyone told me I was a Southerner. I'm a Southerner. And then I moved to Ohio in my early 20s, and I was like, yeah, okay, I'm still a Southerner. I'm different than these people. I don't function in the snow. I don't, yeah, I mean, there were all kinds of changes. I mean, language changes. You wouldn't think it would be that different, but I experienced that. So then I moved to Georgia. And I thought, okay, this is a little different than the Texas South that I know. But we lived in Atlanta, you know, so it was a very metropolitan, diverse, you know, but we'd go out to the outskirts and I'd see different kind of food traditions. And, you know, I mean, I could see some differences there and started to question, well, what is Southern? And then moved to Mississippi, you know, which was a completely different experience. And so at that point, I really started questioning what does this mean? So the first project that I took on looked at a PR campaign that wasn't really the state of Mississippi, it was on behalf of the state of Mississippi. A company did a PR campaign for changing the image of the state, and it actually got national attention. Now, they sent posters, a complete set of posters out to every school in the state because they said they were trying to target Mississippi school kids who didn't think positively enough about themselves, right? Well, we could go into specifics on how the message kind of missed the point. I mean, they were not really targeting those folks, but it was interesting what the campaign said about what it means to be Southern and how it dealt with some stereotypes but ignored lots of history, you know, strategically. So. The next thing that I looked at was Eudora Welty and her photography projects. I don't know, I mean, Eudora Welty is a huge deal in Mississippi. They're very proud of her literary tradition, but she was also an incredible photographer. Yeah, and that was, in fact, her first true love. She traveled around the state, taking Depression-era photos to document poverty, you know, not unlike some of the other works that we've seen. And she felt like she could tell her story through those photos, and she talks a lot about how her writing was influenced by this experience and by the photographs that she took. So again, coming back to that identity issue and what this said about Southerners through photography. More recently, and I can go on to this slide, this is what we focused more attention on in terms of identity work in the South. So again, this is with Ashley Stokes, and we wanted to find a way to bring together our interest in social movements, in this case food movements, social identity, and food, you know, because I mean, what a great, you know, research assignment, because we knew at some point we would have to travel around the South and experience the food in all different places. And so forget the numbers. I think it was, and it's probably, we've continued with this research. So 10 different states. I've lost track of the number of cities, hundreds of different locations. Sometimes it was like the high-end New South restaurants, but a lot of times it was dives. It was, you know, roadside farmers markets. It was church dinners and barbecue festivals and fried everything at, you know, small town festivals. We're trying to find out how food could speak, how food could communicate, stretching the limits of what it means to be, what is a rhetorical text, what do we examine, and then of course what it means to be Southern and how we speak that in terms of our food. And so the argument that we make with the book, which I'm really happy about the fact that it was just reissued this last November in paperback with University Press, Race and Media series edited by Davis Houck. So it does enter into some important conversations about the history of the South and how it is that we can celebrate food while also recognizing sometimes the really difficult stories around why we have certain foods in the South. It is largely story-based, although we look at everything for text, the sight, the sounds, the smells, the touch, the experience, the memories surrounding foods. And all of that comes out through our stories, but also all the stories that we collected through those experiences, which leads to another area of interest, and that is rhetorical fieldwork, which at the time was brand new. So back to what the heck are we doing? I mean, I was pulling out books from my master's program, looking at how do you conduct an interview, you know, how do you not be awkward in this situation where you're clearly observing people and making notes. And we fumbled around for a while, and little did we know that there was this whole emerging area of rhetorical fieldwork. And so we've luckily that saved us right at the end of this process. We figured out a lot of it, but didn't have a language necessarily for some of it. So we've entered into that conversation as well. So the last area that we're now embarking on is another project, the fourth book. It's the part of the Peter Lang series on frontiers in political communication, edited by Mary Stuckey and Mitchell McKinney. And in this case, we wanted to enter into the conversation about critical regionalism, the idea that regions are manufactured, especially through rhetoric, but not solely. But we specifically wanted to look at the division between urban and rural, and it was partially because of politics. We knew that this was part of the story, or at least we were told this was part of the story, that there are these differences, and that accounts for some of the voting. So it's an edited volume, and we're just now receiving those chapters, and I think it's going to be a fantastic collection that looks at all different areas of the U.S., all different kinds of rhetorical texts. So why, again, what's the thread that connects all of this? It all comes back to identity. I do have a lot of interests. I think there are benefits to that. It keeps me fresh. There's always a new literature that I have to investigate, to dig into. I think it also gives lots of opportunities to co-author, which was new to me. There was not a tradition of co-authoring coming through my PhD program. And once I discovered the joys of co-authoring, I'm all about it. And not just because, it is nice. I was talking to someone earlier about it's this glorious feeling of sending away what seems to be just like scribbling. Like, I don't know, these are horrible notes, what do you do? And it comes back and it's beautiful because they've worked on it and they think it's junk now, but you're getting it back. It looks so much stronger. I love that back and forth. I love that you can share those experiences, and so I've been fortunate to have that with partnership with several people, including more graduate students recently. So, but it's always going to come back to that thread of identity. So I know the last thing that I'm going to touch on, and so we can wrap up and we can chat about any of these topics, is the area of teaching. And here I always feel like I teach a class called, it's just a professionalization seminar. Originally, it was intended to be a pedagogy course because students felt like they wanted more direction when it came to teaching their own classes. And the chair thought it would be good for me to teach grad students how to run a communication center. And I was like, I don't really have an interest in creating a bunch of mini-me's, and not everyone wants to do that. So it really quickly changed. It's a little bit about teaching. It's also about job seeking, publishing, writing/publishing, navigating the tenure process, those kinds of things. One of the assignments that they have is writing a teaching philosophy, and I think that is the hardest writing assignment in existence. I don't know, it may come very naturally to you, but to me, regardless of what you write, it feels like everyone's written this before me. Okay, so I'm feeling a little bit like this with talking about my teaching philosophy. But as a result of those conversations, I think what I've crystallized, first of all, I do share my philosophy with all students. I put it right on my syllabus, and I try to talk about it on day one, which will be Thursday in this case. Our semester hasn't started yet. And I talk about the importance of peer learning. I say experiential and active learning here. I think it's all kind of wrapped up, and it can come out in various can come out in the classroom in various ways. But one way is like interacting with peers, which does a couple of things. It takes the pressure off you as the instructor. You get a second opinion in there, not always the most accurate opinion, but some additional feedback, some confirmation from peers. You also get interaction between students, and And I think that's a really important part in getting them to feel invested in the class, in the projects that they have. So anytime there's a writing project or a speaking project, whether it's undergrad, like public speaking, all the way to grad, rhetorical criticism, there's going to be a peer review, peer feedback kind of process. Students kind of expect that. I also, part of experiential and active is service learning. I've used service learning for years. I was really fortunate to work with someone at Del Mar College, the first place that was my first official job at a community college in Corpus Christi. And one of my colleagues went to NCA and attended one of the early service learning workshops and came back and said, hey, I know about this thing, let me tell you. And we started incorporating that, way back in the early or mid-90s. So that's become a big part of the class. Not every class, because I don't think it works for every class, and that'll connect up with this last element of teaching. But for the capstone in particular, I helped to revise the curriculum in there so that students would bring all the knowledge that they had about the discipline into the capstone and would serve the community and would reflect on it. In this case, they go out and work with a nonprofit and serve as a communication consultant in some way. And it doesn't have to be a huge project that they undertake, it just has to be informed by research and by knowledge in the area. And they have to see it through as much as they can. Sometimes it's hard and there can be obstacles there. So, those are some examples. Discussion-based, very much active, regardless of the class. I think connected to the real world, of course, everything. It's hard to find the right phrase there, but I want students to automatically see why they're in that class. Or I shouldn't say automatically. I need to convince them of that in a lot of cases. But from day one, I want them to see that path. This is not just an obstacle. This is how you will use this information. But I also think that a lot of the work that happens there has to happen through assignments and through the conversations you're having in class, because it may not be their problem, it may be the kinds of conversations that we're having. They're not making those connections. And so the best compliment I can get is a note from a student saying, aha, this was exactly, we talked about this in class, I saw it at play in the speaking center or at my new job or in another class. Connections are there. And I think that makes it so much more significant to them. Or the idea of it being organic, that the assignments especially are organic, is that it makes sense. It's a natural extension of the learning process. It's not just a hoop. The worst thing is a university requirement where you have to, let's say, write 5,000 words in a semester and no one understands why, right? Students are going to hate it, the faculty hate it, everyone hates it, not organic. Even if it's good for them, not organic. But a speech where they have to talk about their major or create their own audience and present the information as if they're an expert in that area, or a capstone project where they're helping a nonprofit where they actually see it. Those are organic kinds of examples of assignments that I think work really well. Again, I don't think you can do it with every single thing, but as much as possible. That's what really guides me. So I've kind of given you an idea of the kinds of classes that I teach. A lot of them are public speaking, argumentation, debate, social movement controversy, rhetorical criticism. And a lot of those, we may not have the same titles, but there is a lot of overlap with your Voices of American Women. I've taught the suffrage movement class, for example, and I've really enjoyed that. Place, community, and communication, there's obviously some overlap with the work that I'm doing there now. And I'd love to teach a rhetorical fieldwork class. I haven't yet been able to do that, but I think there's so much possibility, especially in a place like Memphis. And an advocacy and controversy course on the graduate level is something that I've been really interested in teaching as well, even though I kind of push it into every class that I teach. So I will stop there because I know you may have some comments or questions, but I do want to thank you for having me here and asking me to to share more about my past. I think from everything I've gathered, it's a great place. I really love the idea that I could be a part of the tradition of the program, and also helping facilitate that process of going into the future with a lot of the changes that have happened. And so I'm happy to answer questions or to take comments from those of you who might want to know more about my vision there. So. I know some of you will have to run, but yeah.
Wendy, I want to go back to this concept of rhetorical fieldwork, and I'm really interested in the food studies that you're connecting to identity. And I'm just curious, who are your participants in these food studies, and what role does race and social class play into your analysis?
That is a large part of the story. So I wouldn't necessarily call people participants, because it's not like we went out into the field with a set of questions and asked the questions of different people. For example, we did not need IRB approval for this research. It was at the beginning, it was like, oh, we've never thought about this as rhetoricians. And so we actually, IRB on the UNC Charlotte campus was a little more comfortable with that research. For AUSM, it was newer, and so they didn't really know what to do with it at first. But that, the bottom line is it's not the same kind of field research. It's more about going out into different environments and experiencing it. And, as two white women traveling through the South, there were times when it was like, I don't know that we were getting the most authentic experience. And that's one of the things that we talk about from the beginning, is that there's only so much that we're going to reflect here. But we're going to try to get at some of the stories of the South. And so, anytime you talk about the history of Southern food, you're going to talk about race. You're going to talk about how so many of the recipes were influenced by the slave history and people who didn't necessarily want to cook the food in that environment. You're going to talk about kind of the invisible cooks who never got credit for the recipes, and who maybe were grateful for the paycheck, but weren't so happy about the situation where they were cooking the food, that kind of thing.
So are you saying that these are things that you do talk about in your analysis?
Yes.
That's what I'm understanding.
This was a way for us to get, the main argument of this particular book is that food connects us. It connects all of us. It has the potential to do that. And a part of that is acknowledging history of race, racism, of violence, class, and poverty. Poverty is a large part of the Southern food tradition. Regionalism, gender. We talk about a lot of happy things, because that's what connects us. We talk about food and everyone lights up and they want to share stories of their favorite dishes. But hidden beneath that is always that history that we need to talk more about. So that's the argument, is that food provides the opening. It connects us, but it can force us to have some of those conversations. I think if you're study foodways at all, you know the Southern Foodways Alliance that operates out of the University of Mississippi. And that's one of the things that I think they do a really nice job of telling the stories of our foodways, of the Southern foodways, and how not all of them are happy stories. So yes, absolutely, that's a big part of it.
And I just have one other follow-up question for you. So I'm also curious, I know that you and your co-author are white women working in an area, you're researching in an area that involves a myriad of complexities in terms of race and social class and gender and biracial categories and everything else. And so I'm curious, besides you, have you worked with any scholars of color on this?
We don't co-author necessarily, but that's been part of the process of sharing with other folks and getting feedback on it. But we definitely talk about that as a limitation. And and we even write about that in the book. For example, we wanted to compare the experience of going to little dives here and there throughout the South versus going to a soul food place in Chicago. So we found that we got recommendations on the best place to go for soul food, and we just went. I don't know Chicago very well, but I mean, we hopped in a taxi, and the taxi got lost, and we called the restaurant and said, hey, we're trying to make it there, and they told us how to get there. And the second we walked in the door, they knew instantly it was us that called, right? Because there's this white woman, on the phone, and I mean, we were given like the queen treatment, because most people were just going through line and picking out their food. They did tables. They insisted on table service for us, and so it was very clear. We write about that experience and saying, we can write about the food itself, but clearly this was a limitation. We could not fully experience the community element that was such an important part of that, because we were clearly outsiders. We've struggled with that question from the first paper we've written on this topic, because we realized there were some things there were just some limitations. And I guess the only way we found to finally deal with it, except for going forward, potentially cooperating with others, is just to say this is a limitation. We want to write about the possibilities, and we hope we encourage other folks to investigate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really important question.
What was it asked in Chicago? I'm from Chicago.
You would ask that, and I'm going to have to think about it for a minute. It's actually a pretty famous one. So let me tell you, because we're having dinner tonight, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and she can share it with you too. Because the food was incredible. It was very different. I mean, there was more of a sugar element. There's a history there and why, but yeah, it was great.
I'm wondering about your work with PETA and identity, and if you look at all into how PETA establishes the identity, because its identity is really hotly contested in the animal rights and rescue world.
Oh yeah.
A lot of rescuers.
In every world.
Yeah, but a lot of rescuers, like major organizations, see PETA as the enemy. And so have you looked at how they establish their identity as animal rescuers as opposed to hurting animals?
I mean, I've thought about that just personally. To me, I was always more interested in the identity division, or blurring that division between animal and human. I haven't been as interested or invested in PETA and how they portray themselves. Although I did write a chapter, I guess I didn't put it up there, but it looks at Center for Consumer Freedom, which is an AstroTurf organization. You know that? I love that term.
I don't know that term.
Well, I mean, it's a fake grassroots organization.
Okay.
It appears to be grassroots, but it's really funded by like the food and beverage industry. And the Center for Consumer Freedom really was set up by the food and beverage industry to attack PETA. They're the ones behind the campaign that says PETA kills animals.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they are credited with that. So they're really good at marketing. It's a really interesting example of what appear to be two social movement organizations going at it, but one is like, they're both well funded, but funded in different ways. Anyway, I mean, the quick answer to that is PETA doesn't care. They're going to do their thing, and they think that that's the best path to helping animals. So if I make you mad with this Holocaust campaign, at least you thought about animals, and maybe you'll think twice. I may make you mad. I may anger this other animal rights organization. Doesn't matter. We're helping animals. I think that's more of an organizational communication issue. I think there's a lot of, interesting examples through PETA, but it's just not one that I've necessarily gone into.
So I wanted to ask you a question about pedagogy, just to see if you have any thoughts or if you've done anything in the classroom related to this. So I am in the PhD program, and I came to this bias. I do media studies work, but I've been in English departments before, so rhetoric for me was part of composition and rhetoric, and my pedagogical training was in that discipline. So and now I'm teaching world communication. So I've been trying to find, like, where's the radical oral communication pedagogy? Like, it was shocking to me that there wasn't the same kind of tradition as what happened like in the 70s and beyond in Congress. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts about that, or any suggestions for where to look, or things you try to do in the classroom, because it seems like oral comm is really set up in a like super bourgeois way.
Yeah.
And that isn't, there's not a lot of reflexivity around that. It's kind of like, well, everybody just teaches it, and you can keep the radical stuff over in these other classes. But I'm interested in thinking, I'm thinking about putting together a panel for NCA and see if I can get some other people on it about this topic.
Yikes, that's actually a really hard question, because yeah, I encountered that. So when I first started looking into the writing center literature, I was looking for anything that would help. You know, I encountered all of these debates that writing folks had been having for a long time, that we just weren't having. I mean, when I went to create, so I used to teach a faculty course as part of the communication center. I think I mentioned this, that yeah, it was like an 8-week course where faculty would come in and overhaul a course so that it was writing and speaking intensive. We wanted to give them something to read, and we didn't want it to just be like manual, teaching manual kind of stuff. We wanted some journal articles that kind of dug into those questions. Well, on the writing side, you have these really robust debates, and we're like, we're not even there. So I would have faculty, for example, that would say, I just can't stand that, you know, these students, they just don't, their grammar's horrible. How do I fix it? You know, and the writing center folks would pull from literature to argue, well, you know, that's maybe not the best approach. Perhaps, you know, grammar is not the most important thing in this case. Maybe you should build up the writer rather than tearing down, you know, the writing that they've done in this case. Anyway, I don't know that there's an easy answer. I mean, the Foss's invitational rhetoric stuff, I think many people would list that. I just don't, you know, it's never taken off. I think there are problems with it. But I think it definitely asks some important questions at any rate. I think there are some interesting articles on sort of ebonics in the classroom, and so that gets at the writing issue a little bit. The idea of fixing it, you know, the article, the research talks about, you know, rather than approaching fixing it, let's try to understand what, you know, why this language is being used, and respecting the history, and then talking about changing up the audiences, those kinds of. I don't think that's radical. It's just closer to questioning what we're doing. So, I mean, are there other ideas on that topic? Or are you different questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Sure. Do you want to go, John? You can go. Go ahead. I was curious in terms of like particularly the PhD program and kind of designing. What are your thoughts about designing maybe a curriculum that kind of prepares students as they go through the program to be prepared for the job market? I know you had mentioned that a lot of students talk about those kind of things.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious what you think about, like, what does it look like? Like, what does it need to include in a 4 or 5 year experience, and then what do we want at the end point our students to come out with under their belt, so that they're actually able to be competitive in the market, as opposed to, okay, hey, I got this PhD, but
Yeah, where are my jobs? They're just going on.
So just curious.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we still need to do more work in that area. So the class that I talked about, the professionalization seminar, that was the whole idea. I kept seeing people who, you know, were intimidated by the publishing process, or even conference, you know, submitting to a conference. That's intimidating the first time. Second time, third time. I mean, writing and publishing in general. Or going into the classroom, those kinds of things. Just talking about, and what I tried to really bring in was an honest discussion about what you have to do to get a job, the realities of, you know, you may not get the perfect job right in the beginning. You're going to be rejected, you know, just get used to it in terms of publishing, but powering through that. And so I use a lot of really different kinds of writings. But what I've always said with that class, and it hasn't worked yet, is I want to get to the point where we don't need that class, because I want it to be incorporated into our weekly meeting time. So we have, and I don't know if you have something like this, but we have actually bi-weekly colloquium, which is largely focused on research, and it's either a faculty member presenting or a grad student presenting and getting feedback, but sometimes it's more about professional development. And so we've had a few of those where maybe we're talking about the publishing process. We've had submit parties where, NCA deadline's coming up, we all get together and people can sit in a room and hit submit together, just to kind of encourage it. But that was my idea, is that I wanted to see all of that content put into the meeting so that no one had to register for the class, or, it wasn't just that one time that we talked about it. We've kind of been successful at that. The grad students have also picked it up. We've had a grad student organization, but they developed it a bit more and started hosting their own workshops. And so they would invite a faculty member, can you come talk about this? Or they would help each other, like a fourth year would talk about what they did to get to land the job that they did. So I think it has to be intentional like that, and I think it needs to be spread out. I also think it needs to be hands-on. So, we're not just going to talk about how to develop a website, we're going to do it and have your professional portfolio online. We're going to have a submit party, we're going to put together a conference panel proposal together, those kinds of things. So, but yeah, I think there are different ways of doing it.
So you've been here a whole day, so of course it makes you an expert, right? Since you've been here for a day, what do you see just talking to people, like studying us online? What do you see as the biggest opportunities and challenges of this department?
Opportunities is the reputation of the program. And of course, I keep talking about communication studies because that's my discipline, but the opportunities in film are also, I'm learning so much over the last couple of days of conversations, that there's so much potential and already fantastic things happening there. I think the opportunities that you're already using with outreach to community, seeing community as an outlet for research and partnerships, there's a lot more potential there. I think, the tradition of the program seems to me to be both a plus and, something that can tie you down or can keep you back, hold you back from making changes. It seems to me that you've already made a lot of those changes, but I don't know that everyone knows that yet. And of course, a large part of grad programs recruiting is word of mouth. So I think that the things that you've developed through HealthCom in particular, the research projects that are happening, the curriculum that's happening, there's a lot of potential there. A lot of great things are already happening there. So you could push forward with that. The study of rhetoric has changed dramatically, I think, in the department. I mean, there's still that tradition, but it's also changed. And the overlap, I really think the overlap between media and communication that you have that's unique to you because of the film program in the department is a big plus. I mean, I've seen students interested in Southern Miss now that we just became the School of Communication. They always could have taken mass comm media classes, but now that we're a school, we've seen more interest in that, and I think that's a strength, and there's more potential there. I've heard other discussions about push for enrollment. I think that it seems like you have a healthy number of undergrads, but I'm sure that's always never big enough. There's always a need to do. So that's a challenge in recruiting them, which has to happen through the basic course and the courses where they're all going in and learning about the program for the first time. And then it's also a challenge when you get them and don't have enough people to teach them, which is the harder part of that problem. So that's a few things that I've picked up from conversations.
So the chair hiring comes at a bit of a transition in the department where there will be a new graduate coordinator, I guess, in the fall, as far as I know. What recommendation would you give to the new grad coordinator for a vision that perhaps you have what the grad program might look like in 5 years?
Oh, that might be a more specific question than I'd ever tackle. I mean, that goes against part of my philosophy, my leadership philosophy, and that I would never step in and say, you know, move aside, this is what you need to do. I mean, I think every institution is unique, and even though I see remnants of Texas State and Southern Miss and Memphis, I don't know enough about what your students need, you know, what your program needs to fulfill. But I know a good role at graduate coordinators or graduate directors should serve as that you know, clear communication. I mean, I know there's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to grad work. As chair, I've tried to help with that. It drove me crazy that students wouldn't know what classes they were teaching until the very last minute. I just didn't think that was, you know, that was fair to them, and sometimes that's out of our hands. But I think that's both a chair and a grad director kind of role. So clear communication on policies and expectations, those kinds of things. Thinking beyond just the boxes being checked. Have you taken the right classes? Did you fill out this paperwork? But also development issues. So, you know, we just have not had a grad director who's had the time to focus on the kinds of issues I was talking about. They're still scrambling. So I would love to work with a grad director who's able to develop that program a little more. And again, you may already have that, I don't know. So that's something I wouldn't necessarily have seen. I also think that, and this is something I've been happy to see develop over this last year, we now have a basic course director. We really didn't have. We had someone who who signed the paperwork and, you know, met with the TAs every once in a while, but we didn't really have a basic course director until this year. And so she's been now focused more on training TAs to go into the classroom, having those conversations. We also have a speaking center director who took over after me, and she is having conversations with the basic course director about what good public speaking classes should do. And then the grad director is having conversations with both of them about what kind of teaching assignments they should have, making sure they get the biggest, a wide variety of classes to teach, those kinds of things. So those three kind of operate as a team now, and it's beautiful. I love that they're having those conversations.
Okay, I'm going to cut us off. It's 5:20. I think there may be a class in here. I see many bodies sitting out there. So, and we have a date in 10 minutes in another building, but it's also.
Thank you, everyone.